As you're going through an adventure, there are going to be times when you aren't the hero you thought you could be. You don't finish that quest, you get hurt in battle, and it might be something as drastic as losing a limb. Although these can seem bad at the time, these can also be opportunities in order to bring a little role play into your concept and maybe change your character a little bit, maybe for the better in the end. My name is Don. I'm trying to be the Sly Strategist, and let's go ahead and get into it. So, in the realm of tabletop role playing games, just in general, it might be helpful to define what player consequences can be. So, player consequences are usually negative, but not necessarily always. And they are the things that the players experience as a result of their actions, usually for the bad, but sometimes for the good. They can be anything from losing a fight to being imprisoned for killing the captain of the guard because you got into a battle at the bar, or having their reputation ruined in whatever setting you might be. These are important because, as a simulation of real life, there are things that you could do, once again, beating up the captain of the guard or maybe insulting the king's wife. These things should have actions in the game, and it helps to keep the game balanced between following a fantasy storyline as well as actually having some realistic mechanisms behind it. If players know that they can get away with anything without any repercussions, they are less likely to take the game seriously, and everything kind of becomes a joke. And secondly, player consequences help to create a sense of realism. In the real world, our actions do have consequences. We can't just do whatever we want, whenever we want, without facing any consequences. And then a third particular thing is player consequences help create a sense of urgency. If instead of going to take care of that particular villain that was hurting a family at a bakery, if you decide to spend the time crafting something for 2 weeks or in a side quest for a month, there are real consequences to that villain allowing to continue doing what he could do. And it allows your players to think a little bit more about what realistic timelines are, how carefully they have to plan what they're going to do, and that in their mind, this becomes a real world at that point. So let's talk about a couple dilemmas and what you might get out of them by role playing them out. So let's say you're in a battle and you are fighting the big bad guy, or maybe a minor boss before the big bad guy, and one of your players does poorly on a roll, or you're using a fumble deck and they lose a finger, or they get their eyes gone and they have to try and do something in order to continue on in the adventure. You might be in a remote location where there aren't clerics or priests that could possibly help you. You might not be able to get it back. However, there are things that do exist in the game, such as prosthesis in Grand Bazaar and wheelchairs that you can get in Guns and Gear. And these are things that could actually add to your character, even though at the time it might seem debilitating, but they can be overcome. Then there's another particular option, which is kind of like a moral dilemma. So imagine your characters encounter a group of bandits who have been terrorizing a nearby village. As a player, you have a couple choices. You can confront them head on, you can negotiate with them, or you could even just ignore the situation entirely. It's a nearby village, it doesn't really affect you. Every choice is going to have different consequences. If you choose to confront the bandits, you may engage in combat, risking injury or even death. As we were mentioning before in that last little example, you might lose an arm, you might lose a leg. There might be things that could happen to your party that might have lasting repercussions. On the other hand, you could try the negotiation route. And by negotiating, you might lead to a peaceful resolution, earning the gratitude of the villagers. Or maybe a third option is you ignore that totally, and the bandits could become an even greater threat later on. Maybe they could join the group that you are working against, or potentially they could injure someone, an NPC that they were supposed to talk to later that they weren't aware of at the time. These choices not only affect the immediate outcome of the encounter, but could also impact the overall game world. And this is something that players should be aware of, and you as a GM should use as a vehicle in order to progress your story if role playing is a big concern for you. The villagers might offer you assistance or valuable information. Or if you let the bandits continue to impact their village, they might hold a grudge against you if you fail to help them. The consequences can ripple throughout the campaign and shape future events and relationships. This might not work so well in a kind of scripted adventure path, but if this is a homebrew, your own homebrew setting and your own homebrew world, this could be a fantastic way to expand some of the realism of your particular adventure. Then another example we'll kind of go over are maybe quest failures. Players are often presented with various quests, missions, things that an NPC asks them to do, a clue that you get from an NPC or from a bad guy that tells you where you need to go next. However, due to rolls of dice, due to poor planning, due to just bad luck sometimes, not all of these quests, side missions, and leads can be successfully completed. Failure is a real possibility, and failure should be a real possibility. It can have significant consequences. So, an example of this would be if you fail to retrieve an ancient artifact in time to stop the big bad thing from happening. It might fall into the wrong hands, leading to dire consequences for your campaign or the setting. Alternatively, failing to protect a key NPC might result in their demise, altering the course of the narrative because they will no longer get the clues, the hints, or the help they might need later on. Quest failures can immediately seem to be a very bad thing, but they can introduce new challenges, change alliances, or even cause the rise of whole new villains. These failures aren't necessarily meant to discourage players, but rather to create a sense of agency and investment in the game. They now feel that what is going on in the campaign is a real thing that they really need to pay attention to and think through their actions. It forces the player to think strategically and to consider the potential consequences of all their actions, and most importantly, to learn from their mistakes. There are a few things you can do to roleplay player consequences effectively. First, make sure the consequences are fair and appropriate for the player's actions. If the consequences are too harsh, the player will feel like they're being punished. If the consequences are too lenient, the player won't learn anything from their mistake, and it might have well not have happened. Second, you need to be consistent with the consequences. If you let one player get away with something, then other players will feel that they should be able to get away with it too. And then the third thing is to make sure that the consequences are meaningful. The player should honestly feel like they lost something as a result of their action. Now, I hope you enjoyed this little role-playing idea. I do think that consequences really give realism to any campaign. And once again, if your particular table isn't that interested in roleplay, some of these can seem a bit heavy-handed. But if roleplaying is what you really like to do, this just brings so much depth to your adventures. And I personally enjoy it. I would love doing it as a GM, and I know I love consequences as a player. But I hope you liked the video, and if you did, feel free to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. But whatever you do, I hope you have a great day and happy adventuring. Thanks.